This is the fourth in the series of Conversations with an International Teacher of Colour. The idea of these webinars is to reach out to international schools, organisations and recruitment agencies to talk about how they are making systemic changes with regards to racial equity in their institutions. Hi Erin, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been really good speaking to lots of other people over the last couple of weeks, and you're the fourth person that I've spoken to. And basically, I'd just like to find out a little bit about you, your journey in the international schools system, and your position, what you're doing, your school. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really interested in talking with other people and also learning from other people about DEI work and what's happening in their schools. And also equally as happy to contribute kind of where we are in our journey. So I'm really looking forward to this today. So a little bit about myself. My background is I'm an American passport holder, but I grew up as a sort of quote unquote third culture kid. And I am increasingly becoming uncomfortable with that term itself. Haven't quite landed on something that describes that part of my identity that feels quite right yet, but definitely searching for it. So that's part of my personal identity. And although I have many, many privileges to my identity, I am also mixed race, which gives me kind of a unique perspective as well. And I definitely bring that into the work that I do around cultural competency in particular. And here I'm at United World College Southeast Asia, and we've got two campuses. There's a Dover campus, and I'm at the East campus. And I've got a few different roles here. I'm deputy head of campus for East, also the middle school principal, but then I also have recently taken on a college DEI lead, which I was doing previously, doing a lot of that kind of work, but then it's more recently become more of a formalized position, which is really exciting. And in that line of work, I work with another colleague who is an anti-racist DEI project lead. So for our college, there's two of us that are really focused on this kind of work. It's definitely an area of passion for me. I think where I really started getting interested in it was probably in high school, being in an international school and just kind of noticing in my classes how really unintentionally, but kids of different backgrounds were being treated in different ways, and then responding to it in sort of stereotypical ways, and just really wondering about that, feeling a bit bothered, unsettled by that kind of thing. And so, doing social justice work is something that I got involved in at a fairly young age. And then that followed me sort of through my early career. And then when I pursued my doctoral degree, my doctoral dissertation is in looking at cultural competency and student engagement, and the relationship between the two. So it's something I love being immersed in. And I've done sort of equity work in the US in public schools before I came to work professionally in international schools. It's definitely a different context, but there's also a lot of things that are transferable to an international school context as well.
Yeah, speaking to a lot of other people, I think the US is far ahead, and there's a lot more work being done in a lot of the schools, organisations compared to certain countries. I know much more than the UK, but also in international schools. I think a lot of international schools are quite far behind. A lot of them are starting their journeys, or they've recently started their journeys in looking at this whole world, basically. And so it's really interesting to sort of find out. I've looked at the structure that you have. Your school, it's really organised. You've got lots of different committees and so forth. It looks fantastic, and that's a model I've sort of shared with my school to sort of say, "Hey guys, you've got to look at this, look at what they're doing. I want to try and speak to Erin."
Mhm.
It's really exciting. So I'm going to ask my first question,
Yep.
which is, why is your school committed to making these changes?
Yeah. So for us, well, like a lot of international schools, it's sort of inherent in our mission. And when we were starting to go through a strategic visioning process at the college level in 2018, the question came up around intercultural understanding and just asking questions about, are we making incorrect assumptions that this is in place? Because we haven't done as much in a consistent, coherent, systemic kind of way. We've just sort of said, oh, this is part of who we are. And just really questioning was that the right thing to do, and came to the conclusion that we needed to bring it to a much more conscious level. We needed to spend time helping our community to understand what intercultural understanding actually entailed and what that would then look like in practice. So that's really the place that we started from. At that point, we kind of tagged it under Action for Diversity, because DEI was not widely known here. And people can get tripped up around the words equity and inclusion if they're not coming from a context where they've heard that kind of thing before. And we didn't want to get tripped up by words. And so we said, right, let's just put it under Action for Diversity, because diversity is something we're very proud about and we need to do more about it. Be more active. And so that's how we started. And really, it was about getting into the community and getting a good sense of where the community was at. And in DEI work, there's a few different ways that you can do that, but definitely lifting the voices of people and empowering people to share their stories is a huge part of it. So we started with hosting a couple of World Cafe events, using a World Cafe structure around diversity, and opened that up to the whole community. And so we had at tables, back when we could all gather around tables like this, we had, everybody from current day students, boarding students, because we do have a boarding population here, and students who are national scholars as well, parents, board members, teachers, staff, support staff, and leaders from both the teaching and learning side and also the administrative operations side of things. And interestingly enough, some of that required me going out and saying, hey, would love for you to be a part of this, because previous to that, it wasn't inclusive in that sense. Like, we've got a really strong community, but for an event like that, there are certain people who would feel like, oh, that's not really for me. A lot in terms of our administrative support staff. Oh, it's teaching and learning. They don't actually want my voice in it. So I actively went out and said, hey, to the union representatives, and said, we would really love for people, can you help me? And they were really excited about that personal invitation. um, so got people, at these tables, went through a process and gathered qualitative data, in terms of people's stories, really digging out lots of different perspectives. And then from there, we got a better sense of the areas of diversity that our community would be interested in prioritizing and spending more time unpacking and figuring out how we could be better about supporting those areas of diversity in our community, and put together a community-wide survey that went to students, secondary students, all staff, all parents, and our alumni as well. And asked a number of questions in there that you might find from sort of equity audit kinds of surveys, just to find out, like, where are people coming from in terms of their comfort level with this, in not so explicit kinds of ways, and asking, in a variety of different ways to see if we could find consistencies and patterns. And we also asked, and we did kind of a drag and drop type of activity where we put a list of different aspects of diversity that had come up from the World Cafe, and we asked them to prioritize for our college. Which areas do you think that we should focus on first? Race, socioeconomic, LGBTQ, gender, you know, all these kinds of, and then we're able to see um, how teachers generally prioritized, how parents generally prioritized, and how students did. And that was really fascinating to do early on in sort of May 2019, because they were different. The kids were much more willing to go for the tougher things, race
Mm.
being one of them. And the adults not so much. They went with kind of the safer areas. So that, you know, that's just an interesting thing to observe within the community, because it helps you to better understand the approaches you need to take as you move forward with strategic planning. So gathered lots of data. So then we had the World Cafe qualitative data, we had quantitative data from the surveys, and also narrative data from those surveys as well. Analyzed all of it and came up with a strategic plan, which is part of what's on the website, and came up with these buckets in terms of how we wanted to plan out the next 18 months. And then of course COVID happened, so everything got delayed. But that's kind of how we ended up with the place that we did. Of course, what also happened in that time was the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. It suddenly became a thing that people wanted to pay attention to, and so use that as a catalyst. Our community was then like, what are we doing? Um, and fortunately, we had put some things in place, although hadn't enacted on many of them yet. A few bits and pieces, but not a lot. But we use that as a catalyst to say, right, so we're going to prioritize anti-racism, even though that didn't come up necessarily in the priority list originally, because we're going to go with the context. And this is really important. And it's really hard. So if we address this, the hard one of the hardest first, that will help to set how we address other areas of diversity as well.
Wow, that's a lot. I had so
It is
many
a lot.
questions going through my head. Time you were like, "Oh, I want to ask." That sounds really interesting. We have done. We did some small things. We did talk about diversity, but we only talked about diversity with the staff, all of the staff, so teaching and non-teaching, and we had these breakout rooms. Because obviously we're in, distance and so forth. And so the breakout rooms made it a little bit easier because there were smaller groups.
Mhm.
But the survey sounds really interesting. I have been speaking to a couple of people about how they've collected data and so forth. And we're sort of going around trying to find out what the best way is for us. We haven't involved the parents so much yet, but we do have a parent DEI committee, who
Okay, good.
I'm actually meeting with later on today. But the thing is, what we're trying to do at our schools, because we have 3 campuses here in the UK and 1 in the Middle East,
Mhm.
trying to do all 4 campuses together and look at the whole thing and be on the same page. So it's a little bit, I think it's taking a bit longer. And
Mm.
we are wanting to accelerate things quite quickly, but we can't because we need to involve everyone. And so, I mean, listening to you, there's so many different ideas there. You know, I think the cafes that you talked about sound really interesting.
Mhm.
We have done something on what we call the living library,
Mhm.
where we ask teachers to talk about themselves, their identity,
Mhm.
which was interesting, but we haven't had that many
Mhm.
recipients yet. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
really great. I was going to ask. This sort of leads on to you've actively involved all of your staff already, and your wider community. Have you actively involved your parents and the wider community specifically?
Mhm. So I'll say actually before going into that, so the parents, there was there were these invitations in 2019 to participate in the World Cafe in the survey, and then COVID. And so then starting this school year, really started working on a number of key initiatives. And in that, parents were not actively involved necessarily, except for a few who were in different working groups and that kind of thing. So one of our reasons for really emphasizing the communications plan and getting that whole website in place was to be sure to inform our community of what was happening, and really also got the chairs of the parent association on board and spent some time helping them to understand the work that had been done, because just because a parent filled out a survey does not necessarily mean they're connecting all the dots. So we have lots of work to do in that area still, but with the parents, so we did that. And the other thing that we've put together, Rosemarin, who's the ARDEI project lead, put together with one of our leads of professional learning, a module for parents around cultural intelligence and unconscious bias that we're now offering throughout the year for parents to then get on board with that side of things as well. But there are parents involved in specifically two of the key sort of leadership groups. Sorry, I lost the other bit of your question. Is it about staff?
It was about staff. You have spoken about staff a little bit, and I notice on your website you have a lot. It seems as if you have a lot of staff involved in committees and students and so forth. I'm just sort of also wondering, how often do you meet and like, first of all, discuss and then actually have things happen?
Yep. Yeah. So if I go sort of through the org chart, so there is the DEI board steering group, and there, besides board members who are also parents, the two chairs of PA are also on that. And so there is a sort of termly update meeting with them. We've got one tomorrow. And then there is an ARDEI task force that's college-wide, and there's a parent that sits on that. With that group, the way it works is we decided together what are some projects that are going to be high leverage initiatives for the community that they could work on and put together a proposal with recommendations for further action that would go to the senior leadership team. And so that's how they would participate, along with, so on that task force are alumni, current students, current staff, as well as a parent. So examples of that work are, I've got one that's actually, it's a recommended ARDEI incident reporting framework that they put together, along with sort of a recommended proposal for an ARDEI. It's actually more DEI support structure for staff. So, you know, who do you go to when something happens? And not because you want to report something, but because you need to talk with somebody about it and figure out what it is that you want to do next. And so that would be one project. Curating resources was another project group worked on what do we need to put together for our next survey, and with what frequency do we want to do sort of pulse surveys or comprehensive surveys with our community to see benchmark like where we are. So that would be one place, and they meet based on their project groups. So we'll meet all together to kind of do updates, sort of every month and a half, something like that. But they're meeting more frequently in their project groups. And then staff are also those that volunteered to be on the Action for Diversity pods on both campuses. Those meet every 2 weeks, so much more frequently. And then depending on the school, staff will be involved with things from sort of a school level in terms of professional learning, or perhaps a departmental level. And so that, yeah, that will vary. And we've got a meeting coming up where we're going to discuss over the next year, what do we want our professional learning model to be for staff.
Just a side question here. You have the Dover campus as well.
Yep.
Are they doing the same work? Do they have the same model?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about all this is college. So yeah, most of those are sit across both campuses. The place where in the examples I just gave it differentiates is there is a Dover campus Action for Diversity pod for staff, and there's an East Campus one. They have the same purpose, sort of as a like a think tank, possibly putting together recommendations as well. But they're people who are really interested in the work. And what happens in those is slightly different because it's different people, different contexts. An example of what we're doing at the East Campus one is there are two people who work in the boarding house who went through a series of workshops that I led, and so now they're interested in facilitating. So I'm working with them to help them to learn how to facilitate this kind of professional learning in this area, and then they're going to do that with me with those pods, because part of it too, as I've been running different workshops, it's saying afterwards like, so who's going to be interested in doing something with this so that we can distribute further.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it? If you can make an people within your organisation confident and competent to be able to go out and actually action things, and then that's when everything will grow. That's what I've sort of seen, and I think we're also hoping to have that same pathway eventually. You mentioned your goals and
Yep.
how you reached them, and using a lot of the data. When you were then looking at that data and creating your goals, was it just you and your committees involved in creating those, or did you sort of then put that out to the wider community and ask for feedback?
Mm. So when we put together the initial strategic plan, it was primarily myself, the head of Dover campus, because she and I were working on this together. Is before we had a project lead, and we worked with a parent who basically does D&I work and is a consultant, but did pro bono work for us to help kind of consolidate it and put it together. And then it went out for feedback from the leadership teams, but not the wider community. Um, yeah, I think part of that is because you want community input, but at some point you've just got to put things in place and start moving ahead and adjust as you go.
I mean, the reason I asked that question is because we always use the word inclusion when we're talking about a lot of this, and you know, it is difficult to have everybody's input on something, and it's just how far do you go once you've got this framework to get input, and what do you take and so forth. So
Yeah. Yeah. And
um,
I would say with that, so one piece I didn't talk about was when we were initially putting together the strategic plan, was to say what kind of change model do we want to use, and looked at a lot of different organizations, tended to be mostly universities because they had more, and US universities because they had more out there for the public to look at, and said, this particular change model makes sense for us, so that we have something, sort of setting some guideposts in terms of the change management side of things, because ultimately this is a massive change management project, and so you've got all the things that you know about project management you have to apply here.
no, absolutely. And I think we've been looking at various models, but now trying to focus on what we can see out in the international school world rather than just universities, which is what we initially had. And it's interesting to see that various models and so forth, but how particular schools like yours have done it have really
Mm,
helped us and
mm,
sort of shape things. Um, Talking about shaping things and looking at models, have you involved consultants?
mm.
You have, I'm assuming, but how have you involved them in helping with your pathway and goals?
Mm. So, as I mentioned initially, with the sort of the strategic planning side of things, worked with a parent who helped us to shape thinking, and also because she's a current parent, she understands our context. Um, and then what we did actually in term one of this school year is we looked for a consultant to work with us, and went through quite an extensive process, vetting a few different consultants. And through that, we decided that actually for us at this point, it doesn't make sense to bring a consultant in because because we have the ability to do it ourselves.
Mm.
And what would make more sense is to get further down the line and then bring in a consultant to say, look at what we're doing. This is what we say we're doing. This is what's actually happening. Are we walking the talk or are we not, from sort of an outside perspective? So we've decided to hold off on the consultant for now, and then bring them in when we're a little bit further down the track so that they can give us a better sense of where we're at, because by that point you lose some of your ability to be critical with your own work,
Mhm.
and it's helpful to bring somebody with an outside perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's listening to other organisations and schools. Some have brought consultants in right at the beginning.
Mm,
Some have brought several consultants in. Some have worked with one, and so forth. Some have brought some in to train their staff to do
mm,
the work.
yeah.
Some have brought some in to just raise awareness and help raise awareness. And so I
Mm,
think there's lots of different ways of doing it. And like you said, you've got to think of your own context.
yeah.
And if you have that and you know that,
Mm,
and then it's really important.
yeah, and I think for us, uh, with the consultants, again, the danger of bringing in a consultant is that it's not sustainable to continually lean on a consultant. And again, because we have people that can do this work, it was more about how do we leverage internally, and bringing in one of the absolute keys to this is making sure that we have somebody who is fully dedicated, all her time is dedicated to this work and making it happen. So really in my DEI lead, I'm doing the work hands on, but I'm also very much the thought leader in it. And she's very much the project manager side of things. So she's chasing me and telling me, don't forget to do this, all that kind of stuff. So that things are moving along. And I think that's really key. But yeah, with the other side of things, so rather than bringing in a consultant, what we also did is we made sure that we sent 3 people to train the trainer courses. And we did that right before the pandemic, actually, but train the trainer courses around cultural intelligence and unconscious bias. So that, again, all the PD we can run in-house because we've got certified trainers in it.
Can I ask what organisation you used?
Yeah, so we looked at a few different ones. We chose the Cultural Intelligence Center. They are research based. There's a lot of stuff. IDI is another one. They've got a lot of stuff, but um, Cultural Intelligence Center offers quite similar things. And they have sort of one of their locations is quite close to us in Malaysia. So it made more sense just sort of cost wise in terms of flying people when we could fly people to go do that.
Okay, that sounds yeah, really interesting, and it totally makes sense to have people in your school to do that, and then you're sort of self-sustaining. It and the context is really important as well.
Mhm.
Okay, Erin, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much. We've had some fantastic conversations, and I learned even more, I think, offline as well. Yeah, thank you so much again.
And thank you. It was a pleasure and always happy to share the journey.
Fantastic. Okay, bye for now.
Okay, bye bye.